Roethlisberger. All right, what did the Steelers prove in their win last night?
Well, when you look at the early part of the season, the teams they lost to, they're better than I think a lot of people thought. The Browns are better than they thought. Kansas City's better than they thought. Baltimore's better than people thought. And typically the Steelers have some sort of early season adversity, and then they figure out. And it looks like they're going to figure it out again, and they're going to be in the mix at the end. And I think one of the great things that they've done is they've incorporated Vance McDonald, or Vance has had a much bigger role.
Yes.
So now you're getting that presence in the middle of the offense, which they haven't really had, which is going to open up things outside for Juju Schuster-Smith, for Antonio Brown. And you know, his comments at the end, I think, were very mild compared to what we're used to out of Pittsburgh. And
still unnecessary.
Well, it's just I'm sure he's tired of hearing about Le'Veon Bell too, and then he's just joking about it. So because John Connor's done a great job. He has done a great job, and you know, whatever happens with the other guy happens.
Jenna's like Goldilocks in the porridge when it comes to post-game comments. Don't say too little. Jalen Ramsey will roast you for that. Don't add a little spice to it. Big Ben will roast you for that. It's a very small Goldilocks zone that you got to get in Jenna Wolf's good side on post-game comments. Now, as far as
don't even get me started on the lighting.
Exactly, all of it. Jenna's very important to her. Now, as far as the Steelers go, after that loss to Baltimore, we said these next 2 weeks could define their season. They were 1-2-1. They had lost. They had gotten beaten by Kansas City. They had played a poor game against Cleveland week 1 in a tie, and they'd gotten beaten badly by Baltimore. And how did they respond? They beat up on Atlanta, where their defense, yeah, they scored 41, I think, but their defense was the story of that game. A Falcons team that was putting 30 on everybody. They held to 17. And then a Bengals team that offensively had been quite good so far this year. Andy Dalton playing very well. They held them down to 13 points with 2 minutes left in that football game. And or 14 points, pardon me, when the Bengals did respond with that touchdown, they go 7 plays, 75 yards in a minute 8 for the win. It's a huge win. Your point about last year and how it started is well taken. Last year, they were 4-2 through 6 games. This year, 3-2-1. The difference, last year in week 1 at Cleveland, they won 21-18. This year, they tied 21-21. But they are now in a position headed into the bye, assuming they are getting one of their very best players back, to actually now take off. And with this is a huge loss for Cincinnati as far as what they're able to do in the division, and giving Pittsburgh real hope, like, oh, we can still control the AFC North, us and Baltimore, as has been the case seemingly for the last decade.
Yeah, I don't think James Conner's season's over with. I believe Pittsburgh Steelers are going to need him in a big way. Just put a bookmark on that. I just believe he's going to be needed. And I haven't seen a player that's decided that they're going to sit out and then come back and be the same dominant player, like he's just going to take over the NFL. I know the NFL to be harder than that. So I believe the combination of these two running backs coming down the stretch will be needed for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But for me, the Steelers season changed when Cam Hayward, he finally started talking some sense. That was the first good quote that I heard coming out of Pittsburgh in a long time. And he said it's time for people to shut up and start doing the job. And if you don't like doing your job, we don't need you here. And that, facing the Atlanta Falcons, an explosive offense. That facing the Cincinnati Bengals with Andy Dalton, who had been explosive. That, to me, has changed where the Pittsburgh Steelers, their direction, and what their potential is the rest of the season.
I know, Coach, you don't like to get too far ahead of yourself, but if Lev Bell does come back this week and is able to be a little bit of what we saw, and their defense, obviously this is the 2nd week in a row they've played good defense. That was a big question mark in the first couple of games of this season. How much confidence do you have in this team in the AFC?
Well, I'm a big believer in the Steelers, and I always am, just because whenever you've got Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown, you've got a chance. And Ben makes things happen on a consistent basis that are problems. And when they play clean like they played yesterday, there are no turnovers, there are no sacks, they're hard to beat, and they can score it at any point. It's easy to underestimate these guys because there's so much that swirls around them, but then suddenly they show up and they get on these win streaks, and you're dealing with them late. And you add Le'Veon Bell, That's another issue they create.
And I know Le'Veon Bell is supposed to come back this week. Again, the Steelers have all said no one's talked to him. The only person seeming that's talked to him is Jeremy Fowler. I found it a little odd that he wouldn't, if his plan was to show up this week, as he said, he could have shown up Saturday. They couldn't have played him, and they would have still had to pay him for this past week. So I am less certain today than I was Friday that he's actually going to do what he said to Jeremy Fowler and show up this week, get paid for the bye, and then be good to go. But credit to James Conner. In the 3 wins they had during these first 6 games of their season, against Cleveland, James Conner 31 for 135 on the ground and 5 catches. Atlanta 21 for 110 on the ground and 75 yards through the air. And then yesterday against the Bengals, 19 for 111 on the ground and another 4 catches. In those 3 wins, he was a legitimate weapon. He was the type of guy some of his teammates said he could be in the preseason. And so all the credit to him in stepping into not the ideal circumstance.
So how do they use him now when if Lev Bell comes back then?
Well, I was just thinking about the most compelling thing you said there. If he does show up this week and didn't show up on Saturday and lost $800,000, that was a really good stat.
Well, yeah, I mean, because if he shows up Saturday,
because if that happens, yeah, you need to fire your agent at that point. How do they use him?
That was the thinking,
I know
right?
who can represent him.
Yeah, and I know that you like to do that. How can they use him? It's kind of the nice situation that they have is they don't have to rush him into a major role like they did at the start of last year, and we saw when he first came back, he didn't produce very much. He struggled early. So this gives the Steelers flexibility with the way that they've been playing to ease him back into the mix.
Right, you hope it brings more balance. You don't want Ben throwing the ball 46 times and only running the ball 21. So what you'd like to have is around 38 throws, 35 to 38 throws, and then maybe get about 30 carries. He should be able to touch the ball 5 to 8 times in there. You can't expect L. Bell to come back and touch it 20 times on the first. L. Bell, to me, touches the ball 12 to 15 times running it. I give him the ball out in space 3 to 5 times. But James Conner continues to play a role for me. Know the reason why? Because L. Bell told me he was concerned about his workload. So when he came back to work, I would oblige him. I would oblige him. You're going to play part-time. James Conner, to me, has earned a certain degree of respect in the offensive line. When he's in there, they're working hard for him. So we can give James Conner some of the credit, but you have to give that offensive line. You're not making your own holes in those 3 games that he was dominant.
And it's going to be interesting to see how the locker room receives him at this point. There's been a lot of talk in that locker room about him not showing up, not being there for the guys. You know, it's different than last year when he showed up before the start of the season. I'm curious to see how they respond.
Well, he said he'll show up this week, so we'll wait and see. Coach, we'll see you.